Hello and welcome into episode 35 of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside Andrew Ivins, and we got a great show for you today. We'll get to the juice. A lot to talk about. Top 247 running back Mark Fletcher committed to the Ohio State Buckeyes. Florida and Miami knocking on his door. Also, the 2024 Top 247 release date today. A lot to talk about. We'll introduce 12 new 5-stars. Also, look forward to a couple names to look forward to in the future. We'll react to Charlotte's hire of Michigan Associate Head Coach Biff Poggi, and then we'll get into a little analytics concerning the top 247 in the quarterback race there. But Drew, I don't know if you noticed, new backdrop for me. I'm on my second one this week, man. Episode 35. I can't believe they haven't canceled us yet.
Well, I know. I was going to ask you about that. You got a light and a TV remote over your left shoulder there, so I'm liking it.
shout out to the future brother-in-law over here, getting a lot of love. But Drew, let's jump in straight to it. Let's start with Auburn right now, the number 55 class in the country. Cadillac Williams, interim head coach, taking over for Brian Harsin. And you hit me up in pre-production earlier today and said, hey man, there's some things cooking down in the plains right now. So I'm not even going to jump into specifics. I'm just going to hand it to you and let you run with it.
Well, Coop, my favorite thing to say has been head coachless Auburn is recruiting at a really good level right now. We saw what they did this past weekend with that win over Texas A&M. Cadillac Williams, the rest of the staff, the guys that are still there, they packed the stands. And more importantly, Auburn's, there was a call to arms for the fan base, and they showed up. Not only did they roll out that new $92 million football facility, but they get a big win. They create an awesome atmosphere, and I think they're going to feel some of the effects from that here on the recruiting trail. Let's start at the top. Keon Jenkins, a quarterback out of Miami Central. He's currently committed to FIU. He picked up an offer on Saturday night from Auburn. He calls it his dream school. All signs are pointing to him flipping from the Panthers to the Tigers. And I think this is a play from Auburn really to get some of his teammates joining Keon. Lights out Jenkins up on the plains this past weekend was Ruben Bain, the top 247 defensive lineman. Cooper, we've talked about him at length on this show. A lot of people think he's going to end up at Miami. Florida State's been in there. I think this might be an Auburn-Louisville battle at the moment, and he's actually cousins with Keon Jenkins. So if the Tigers were to take lights out the quarterback, they think that might help them with Ruben Bain. Obviously, this all depends on who gets hired as the next head coach there. And then two other guys that are also in the mix. You got Lamar Seymour, a wide receiver that is committed to Pittsburgh. He was also in on an official visit. And same with Stanquan Clark, 4-star linebacker, guy that can get sideline to sideline. So Auburn's trying to package all these guys. A couple of years ago, it was the Dillard 5. By a couple of years, a couple of decades ago. And now I guess this is the Miami Central 4. And then you also got to toss out Louisville's trying to do the same thing. They currently held a commitment from Katarius Hicks, who's a Miami Central guy. They're also recruiting this whole group. So interesting things happening down in the 305. And Auburn seems to be making some inroads at Miami Central, who has a monster game on Friday night as they take on Miami Northwestern in Florida State playoffs.
A lot of moving parts right now, especially in the Plains. They don't have their head coach yet. Expect that in the next couple of weeks, especially with signing day quickly approaching. Drew, we talked about Auburn really as the program that can make a big jump before that December 21st early signing day. We got our eyes on that. And Ruben Bain, one of the most interesting recruitments I think we followed throughout this cycle. But let's get to another one that there's been a lot of eyes on. That is top 247 running back Mark Fletcher out of American Heritage in Florida, currently committed to the Ohio State Buckeyes, Drew. But you got a feeling that might not stick for much longer.
Yeah, 2 days ago when I jumped on here, I said I was going to go out to Mark Fletcher's playoff game, kind of gauge where things stood with him in Ohio State after he spent the weekend at Florida. Coming out of that interaction with him, I thought Ohio State was in a good spot. That is not the case as of Wednesday morning, trading some texts with some people involved in that recruitment. I'm under the vibe that there's a really good chance or, a chance that Fletcher is going to open things back up. And I think Florida is the team to watch out for if that happens. He was in Gainesville. He saw that rushing attack. You got to meet with a ton of different people, meet with Billy Napier. I think that has opened up his ears. I heard Dad really liked that visit. Miami, probably another school to keep an eye on. I've also heard USC and Tennessee, but I think Ohio State's panicking a little bit when it comes to Mark Fletcher. And that wasn't the case not too long ago. They thought this big bruising back was in the boat. He was coming to Columbus. But right now, I think 6 weeks before signing day, I would not be surprised if we see a decommitment from Mark Fletcher, or at least him take more visits and maybe of that official visit variety. He's still got 4 left to use, including 1 to Florida. That would be on the table.
Florida, the number 8 class in the country, according to 24/7 Sports team composite rankings. Billy Napier and the Gators surging right now. So we'll keep an eye on Mark Fletcher. Drew, let's stay in the SEC. Another guy from the state of Florida decommitting the University of Georgia. That is Daniel Harrison, a guy that's a really traitsy corner that a lot of people are after. But it looks like Big Ten country, James Franklin, Jim Harbaugh are going to have something to say when it comes to Daniel Harris.
Yeah, Daniel Harris announces over social media that he is opening it back up. And Steve Wiltfong, the director of recruiting at 24/7 Sports, he fires in a crystal ball pick for the Nittany Lions. Excuse me. I've done the same. Brian Doan has as well. All signs are pointing to Penn State, who finished number 2 for Daniel Harris back in June. But I'd also keep an eye here on Michigan. Jim Harbaugh and the Wolverines have been involved in the recruitment. Daniel Harris, he did get up there to Ann Arbor for a visit back during the summer months. So that's another one to keep an eye on. But I like Penn State here. You know, it's funny, Daniel Harris, you mentioned the traits. I mean, this is a guy that's 6'2", 10'7" in the 100-meter dash. And he's gone through some growing pains here as a senior, but he still make plays. I saw him a few weeks ago. He had an interception in a game. Lots to work with. It's just going to take some time and some seasoning. And to be honest, he reminds me a lot of Joey Porter Jr., who's the current cornerback for the Nittany Lions, CB1 there at State College. So I like Penn State. We'll see if he takes any more visits. Don't think it's a done deal, but a nice little Big Ten SEC flip. I don't know if we're going to consider it that, but it feels like that's the case.
Penn State has done a tremendous job in the secondary, especially in the state of Florida. You look at King Mack out of St. Thomas Aquinas, along with Conrad Hussey. If they can add a guy like Daniel Harris, a little Florida flavor will go a long way for them. Manny Diaz doing a really good job, the new defensive coordinator. So, Drew, let's go to the class of 2024 now, a guy that we've spent a lot of time talking about on this show, but that is top 247 quarterback DJ Lagway. And when you speak about traits, you can't mention another quarterback first without mentioning DJ Lagway. But he set his commitment date for December 7th. A couple teams at the top of that list, Florida. And you have any type of feel on which way this may go?
I think Florida is the one you got to watch out here for. And there's still some others in addition to Clemson in there. You got Texas A&M, USC, LSU, Oklahoma, a bunch of different schools. Baylor, that's where DJ Lagway was this past weekend. But I would, I like Florida's positioning here. I think it's notable that DJ Lagway, as soon as he announced that he is going to be, as soon as he set a commitment date, that he is going to, he wants to build the number 1 recruiting class in the country. And I think that, is lining up well for Florida. Let's say Florida is the pick, Cooper. What happens with Clemson? They don't currently have their quarterback in the 2024 cycle. They are in on DJ Lagway, Jaden Davis, a kid who seems to be trending towards Michigan. That's another person they've been on. Do they pivot over to Jake Merklinger? Something to consider, right, as we get ready for the holidays, these 2024 quarterback dominoes. And I know you're as versed as anyone in that group. They continue to fall, but DJ Lagway is certainly a big one.
Yeah, for sure. And you got Jaden Rashada already in the boat, Marcus Stokes as well. Drew, you mentioned this all the time, but being able to add different skill sets into your quarterback room. If Florida was able to add a guy like DJ Lagway, Drew, you've compared him to Anthony Richardson. I think he's more so KJ Jefferson from Arkansas, but both those guys are very different when you talk about Jaden Rashada, DJ Lagway. Makes a lot of sense for what Florida wants to do in the future. And before we turn the page to the next segment, make sure to follow 24/7 Sports and the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. A lot going on this time of year, like Drew and I always say. Only a couple weeks until early National Signing Day, so keep it locked with the Oyster Boys. We'll be bringing you all the information that you need. But Drew, a big day for us as the 2024 Top 247 saw a facelift. And for us, we put a lot of work into that quarterback room, trying to make sure that we got the right names up at the top of our board. But right now, 12 new 5-stars, Drew, and sitting at the top of that, Dylan Raiola, High School in Arizona. Obviously got some genes there. His dad was an All-American offensive lineman at Nebraska. He was also a 14-year NFL veteran for the Detroit Lions. But Drew, looking at this guy committed to Ohio State right now, 67% passer this year, over 212 yards per game, 8-2 on the season, 18 touchdowns, 4 INTs. The names that come up when you compare, looking for a player comp with Dylan Raiola, Patrick Mahomes, I got to be honest, when you start to think about this guy and the way that he can extend plays with his feet within the pocket, he's got a big, sturdy frame, very strong, can make any throw on the field. It kind of reminded me of a little bit of Ben Roethlisberger, but to me, he is in a category of his own when you start to look at the quarterbacks in 2024.
I agree with you, Cooper. And what really stands out to me about Raiola is how he improvises, extends plays, makes plays off script. But at the same time, he limits his mistakes. He isn't a guy that throws a ton of interceptions. You know, we see it right there, the sidearm angles. I think he's got a hose. And I wrote in the 5-star story I had to do today, he's kind of a surgeon with the football in his hands. Coop, I'm going to be honest, I had not heard that Ben Roethlisberger comp, but I can definitely see it just with how he moves in the pocket. He's had a good season. I think Ohio State is certainly getting a good one. And most of their wide receiver commits, these guys in the 2023 cycle know that. So Dylan Raiola, I think he would probably be in that 5-star category if he were to reclassify to 2023. So he is clear cut out in front when it comes to our 2024 rankings.
Not a bad couple of names to be compared to Patrick Mahomes, Ben Roethlisberger. Remember, both Mahomes and Raiola had the baseball background. Raiola recorded over 90 miles per hour on the mound as well. So something to keep an eye on there with Raiola. But Drew, a lot of defensive flavor in the top 12. Next guy on the board at number 2 is KJ Bolden, and a guy that you are very familiar with, 3-phase player out of Beaufort High School in Georgia. Another guy is a sub 10.8 in the 100-meter. And if there is one theme, I would say, of the guys that we've named 5 stars, it's a verified athleticism, it's multi-phase players and guys that are impact players anywhere on the field.
KJ's an interesting one because, you know, we kind of project him as a safety, but he's been playing more offense here as a junior for Buford, which is expected to contend for a state title. He's got, 23 catches for 422 yards and 2 touchdowns. Has also returned a kickoff 94 yards for a score. And to me, the thing with him is he just plays at a different speed than everyone else, which makes sense given the sub 11 time you mentioned. He's also got a bronze medal in the long jump. I mean, this is a twitched up athlete. I think he's someone, depending on where he goes, he could play, more of a box safety role. He could maybe also play over the top, and then he could probably play wide receiver if he wanted to as well. And the best of the best are battling it out for him. He's been a regular at Alabama. He's been a regular at Georgia. He's been a regular at Clemson. So KJ Bolden, certainly a name to know here in the class of 2024.
Yeah, a little bit of context too. And Andrew and I talked about this before we jumped on the show. Listen, we love KJ Bolden, but the positional value in terms of having a safety at number 2 doesn't always compute. So when you look at the board right now, the top 12 names on the board, these are guys that we have leaned into that not only have production, but they have traits as well. And over the next year, obviously, we expect a lot of fluctuation. But Drew, let's keep it going. Another guy, speaking of traits, our guy, Williams Nwaneri out of Missouri. And you look at him, 6'6", 254 pounds, almost a 7-foot wingspan, 4.98, 4.43 shuttle, 11-inch hands and 8 sacks. He is still putting it together on the field, but a guy that can give you a little bit of everything at the 5 technique, the 3 technique, big, versatile, and he's still growing, still developing into that frame as well. But I think this kid's going to be a monster.
Or remember the name, because I think he's a lock for the 2024 edition of the Freaks list. I mean, you mentioned those measurables, NFL size. You tossed out the 11-inch hands and that long reach. I think what Alan True, our colleague up in the Midwest, said about Williams was the most notable thing. I mean, this guy's progressed immensely here over the past 6 months, and he's still got a ways to go. He's had some siblings that have played different sports at the collegiate level. He's got ties to Africa. His parents are both born in Nigeria. A lot to like. I think the best football is ahead of him, and we're trying to find these traitsy point of attack pass rushers, and he's the one we like the most, and that's why he's at number 3 in the rankings.
Well, let's go to number 2 now. That is David Stone. He kind of popped up on our radar or made his presence known earlier in the season, that game against Venice, where he really showed out for IMG Academy on a loaded defensive line. He looked like the best player that day. 6'4", 3/4, 271, almost an 82-inch wing, 35-inch arms. Got the shot put in discus background. Drew, this is a guy, a disruptive force. When I kind of look at players in 2023 cycle that he kind of reminds me of, 5-star David Hicks comes to mind.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Cooper. And, he's kind of at this new age interior rusher. He's a guy that can win with heavy hands, a guy that can win with leverage, but he can more importantly get after the quarterback. You mentioned that game against Venice. We also see him here on the screen against Miami Central. I think the real coming out party was for him against Phoenix City Central. He had 8 tackles, multiple quarterback hurries, but he's a guy that can create pressure. He can redirect, get outside the hashes. So someone that we like a lot, and colleges like him a lot. Michigan State, Oklahoma, Miami, some of the schools that are in early on David Stone, who's originally from Oklahoma. He's also got some ties to Wisconsin. I had an uncle that played there for the Badgers before making his way to the NBA. So I've said this in the past, the IMG D line will be a major storyline in the 2024 cycle. Him and Ernest Weilor, the guy we're going to get to in a little bit, are going to be two prospects that are, I would assume, are household names.
Defensive coordinator Brian Niedermeyer's got to be loving that. You got 2 5-stars in the class of 2024. You got Samuel Impemba out there, as well as Gabe Harris. So a loaded IMG team defensively. Drew, let's stay in the state of Florida, in the Sunshine State, and a guy that you love. So I'm going to tee this up for you, but that is the cousin of Seahawks starting quarterback Geno Smith and former West Virginia standout. That is Jeremiah Smith from Chaminade Madonna, and a guy, Drew, you have given some lofty comparisons to, but he's had a great year. 9 games played, 38 receptions, 720 yards, 13 touchdowns. But you love this guy.
He is. He's a monster. And thank you for putting some respect on Geno Smith. Got to represent South Florida in the National Football League. Jeremiah, he's just a big-bodied outside receiver. Most people are going to be familiar with him because he can go up and win 50-50 balls on the outside. He can track the football over his shoulder. He can make contested catches. He knows how to adjust in the air. I think the most impressive thing I've seen from Jeremiah here this fall is his ability to create separation while working the short to intermediate numbers of the route tree. That was kind of my big question. But for a guy that's still growing into his frame, and I always compare him to a puppy, you look at his hands, you look at his feet, he's nowhere close to being filled out. I mean, he's going to get bigger and bigger, but he's someone that can sink his hips, get in and out of his breaks, and attack the football. And then, Coop, the other big thing with him is everyone wonders about that speed. He doesn't have any 40-yard dash times anywhere, but we were talking about it earlier today with someone else on a call. He was a state qualifier in the 300-meter hurdles, which is one of the most difficult track and field events out there. And then you pop on the tape this season, he's pulling away from some top 247 defenders in the open field. So I'm not worried about the speed with Jeremiah Smith. I think he's one of the safest things so far we know about in the class of 2024.
I agree. And you look for that trait. What is that trait that kind of positions him well within the top 5 in that 5-star status where we have him? He plays the game the right way. He's incredibly nuanced, not only as a route runner, but he knows how to create separation. We talked about that big 6'3" frame. He knows how to use his body really well in terms of positioning himself between the ball and the defender, and at the same time, really strong hands, an elite 50-50 ball catcher. So I like Jeremiah Smith a lot, Drew. I can't argue there, but we're in your footprint, Drew. We're going to go to a freak, a guy that played on the same team as Georgia's standout Malachi Starks last season. He's in the same range right now, believe it or not, but that is linebacker Sammy Brown out of Jefferson High School in Georgia, a 3-sport athlete, a wrestler, track and field background as well. This is a guy hovered around 225, popped a 10,700 meter this year, also a long jump as well. I mean, talk about a distinguished athlete. This guy is a dude.
He's a workout warrior, and you're leaving out what his profile, what he does in the offensive side of the ball. He's averaging over 10 yards a carry this fall at Jefferson, like you noted. And why is that notable? I mean, look at Harold Perkins, the star freshman linebacker for LSU. That's another guy that got significant production on the offensive side of the ball on Friday nights. And Sammy Brown, I'm not saying he's Harold Perkins, but when you start looking at the data, those guys are pretty similar. Sammy actually messaged me. I thought he only had 85 tackles here as a junior, but he told me he's up to over 100 in his season. His team's in the state playoffs, but this is a guy that can fly around. He's obviously an exceptional athlete. I call him a workout warrior. I think there's some, he too is a lock to make the freaks list. Clemson's involved in his recruitment. Georgia's involved in his recruitment. He's been up to Notre Dame. He's one that everyone's going to be fighting for over the next 6 months once we turn that page to the 2024 cycle.
A fact check from the boy himself, Drew. You gotta stay up on the work right there. But let's stay in the Peach State. Mike Matthews, Drew. I like this guy a lot. Another guy that's listed as an athlete. I think a lot of people thought he was going to play defense, but the more you watch the tape, there's a lot more evidence of him projecting as an offensive player at the next level. But Drew, a guy that you like a lot, and another guy that was kind of the center of the conversation earlier today.
I think when you think body control, pop on the tape of Mike Matthews. This guy is smooth and coordinated in everything he does. There's not many false steps. And I think that comes from his basketball background. You know, his dad played overseas. Mike plays himself. He reports a hoops offer from Mississippi State. I mean, that's SEC basketball. That's not something easy to do. So we really, really like him. He's produced here for Parkview as a junior, almost 1,000 yards receiving, a few interceptions. I probably like him more on defense than I do on offense, but I think the big debate, Cooper, over the next few months is going to be KJ Bolden or Mike Matthews. Pick your flavor. Both those guys can get it done on either side of the ball. They're both from the Atlanta metro. I mean, I think they're about 25 miles apart from each other, and they're both being courted by the best of the best. So Mike Matthews, KJ Bolden, I think that's going to be a fun debate here as we get into more and more of the 2024 cycle, because they're both elite, explosive athletes. And like I said, they both can make an impact on offense and defense.
A lot of Florida, Georgia flavor. That is not a coincidence. Andrew spends a lot of time on the road. He's got to see a lot of these guys live. So that's kind of what we lean into. Drew, another guy that you have gotten to see a little bit of and used to play opposite of Desmond Ricks before he reclassified, but that is Ellis Robinson. Once again, another standout from that IMG defense, and a guy that we like, a really long corner. He's sub 6 foot, but he is a long 5'11", 79-inch wing, a guy that is a combine warrior, 4.56 on the 40, 36-inch vert, and a guy that's also hit 22 miles per hour plus on the GPS. So another freaky, kind of traitsy guy that I still think is developing on the field. Certainly being at IMG Academy will help that, but I really like this guy, and the arrows pointing up.
Yeah, Ellis, tools with him. And he played his sophomore season up there in New York where he had 8 interceptions, and he's gotten to IMG Academy and he's played opposite of Desmond Ricks. So some schools have tried to challenge Ellis out on the outside. And I think through the first 3 games, he had 4 pass breakups. I love his ability to fight through hands and explode towards the football, kind of close those gaps. And he's one to certainly know, one to watch. I believe 24/7 Sports Director of Recruiting Steve Wilfong already has a Georgia crystal ball pick logged for Ellis, and that will be one to monitor. Fran Brown is doing an excellent job recruiting for UGA in that secondary. So Ellis, he's got some tools, he's got some traits. I expect him to have a big spring here on the camp circuit and continue to make a name for himself.
He's about as pretty as they come when you're looking for a defensive back, especially a corner that can give you man-to-man abilities. So a lot to like with Ellis Robinson, a guy that's a little bit different at the cornerback position from the state of Alabama. Our first one on the board, that is Jalen Mbakwe from Clay Chalkville, and a guy that we've kind of had circled on our board for quite some time. He's a 3-phase player, one of the most dynamic playmakers in the country, and I think the best return man in the country, but absolutely electric with the ball in his hands. He's been banged up this season, missed most of the regular season, and missed a playoff loss to Parker, which was a little bit of a shocker. But Drew, I like this kid, Alabama commit. He's going to fit in well there. But another guy, when you watch the tape, the majority of the snaps are on the offensive side of the ball. And it's kind of hard to argue with how dynamic he is with the ball in his hands that he's going to play defense at the next level. Needless to say, this is a really good problem for Nick Saban.
He's explosive, and we keep using the term explosive, but really, this initial 12 is all going to be about the traits. What can they do? What have they shown us? And Jalen's a kid who's got a pair of silver medals last year in the 100-meter dash and the 200-meter dash. And Coop, last night when we were on the phone, you said, hey, I think Alabama could try him out at wide receiver. I was a little bit initially taken back. Go back into the huddle, watch some more, and I agree with you. He kind of reminds me a little of Isaiah Bond from last cycle, who, was he going to be a wide receiver? Was he going to be a DB? I don't think it really matters. Isaiah Bond is playing offense for the Crimson Tide. I think it's a good problem to have, but no, he is dynamic. You hit it on the head with that term, dynamic.
Let's go back out west, Drew, and I have this guy highlighted in red because he was probably one of my favorite guys going back through this morning, revisiting the tape. But I love Elijah Rushing out of the state of Arizona, now a newly minted 5-star for us. But you talk about the traits: 6'5", 3/4, 224, 80-inch plus wing, 4.48 on the shuttle, 10.5 sacks this season, Drew. And I'm going to emphasize that because right now, he seems like he's at the point where he was all projection last year. Now you're starting to see this guy mature on the field, a guy that is position versatile, can play outside end, and has really been developing well on the edge.
Yeah, and you see his ability to bend right there. I love that. I just wonder, is he going to be able to transition speed to power? Because right now he's kind of freelancing. He's simply a better athlete than those guys across from him, but it's hard to knock the production. Cooper, you mentioned that stack number. He's got like 58 quarterback hurries, according to Max Preps. That's insane. Talking with Chris Singletary, our guy in Arizona right there, he said Elijah really hasn't even lifted weights. And then he sent me some clips of Elijah running track this past offseason. And who do you compare him to that's playing on Sundays? I think with that length, toss out Greg Russo, who's with the Buffalo Bills, formerly at Miami. It just really is going to come down to how does this body fill out over the next few years. But you cannot argue with the projectable tools that he has got. Elijah Rushing has everything you're looking for in a modern day pass rusher.
Already a number of programs that made him a priority and will continue to make him a priority, especially on the West Coast, as those big bodies are hard to find. Drew, rounding it out here, 2 more names: Kobe Black from Waco, Texas, and Connolly. And this is a Gabe Brooks favorite. He loves him. Another 3-phase player, very dynamic on the offensive side of the ball, but very natural ball skills as well. Instinctive, 6-foot+ frame, 190 pounds. He looks like he could suit up tomorrow for an SEC team.
4.25 in the short shuttle, 6.98 in the 3-cone drill. We took 2 of those times and put him in the 2022 NFL scouting combine. Kobe Black would be getting drafted right now. I mean, this guy can move. He tests extremely well. He's got +4" in that wingspan. So this is, again, like with Elijah Rushing, projectable tools. You got that here with Kobe Black. And Coop, he's got 301 receiving yards, 299 rushing yards this fall. He's also returned a kickoff for a touchdown, 2 pick sixes. I mean, this guy has done it all. They just needed him to line up and kick an extra point after the next one, and he'll score 5 different ways. So I'm a big fan of Kobe Black.
All right, Drew, number 12 in the last 5-star in this 2024 top 247 update, Ernest Willor, a name that we mentioned earlier, Baltimore native, I believe, and a guy, Drew, when we saw him at the Future 50 in Bradenton, Florida, we had to go back through the roster and said, who in the heck is this guy? He wasn't a 2023. He's a 2024, and he really had a good day there. That's kind of where he impressed. He has carried that on this season. Got to love what you've seen from the big man so far.
Coop, you mentioned what David Stone did against Venice. Ernest Weiler was just as good. He had a pick 6. He jumped up in the air and grabbed the ball and ran into the end zone against Venice. I think out of all 12 of the 5 stars. This is maybe the one that doesn't have the most data behind him, but he does have a basketball background. You mentioned that future 50 performance. I think it's excellent. He wins with his initial get off. He's got a few pass rushing moves. And at IMG Academy early on in the season, they deployed him more as an edge player. But I think he's more of a natural coming from the inside. I like the frame on him. And I think he's someone that's eventually going to be pushing 275, 280 pounds, someone that can attack the A gap, get in the B gap on stunts. Ernest Weiler, one to keep an eye on. Penn State's a school he's visited. Miami's a school he's visited. And Steve Wilfong recently reported, I think he talked with Ernest's dad, that he might be up at Ohio State for that Michigan game at Thanksgiving weekend.
Will definitely be a priority, especially for those teams down south. He has continued to impress every time we have seen him. So there you have it, the 12 5-stars in the top 247 2024 update, naming them before December here, and only 20 more to go. Drew, I'm sure there will be quite a shuffle as there's 13 months before these guys sign. So before we get to segment 3, just a reminder, keep it locked 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure you give us a like, a comment as well. And if you care to do so, make sure you subscribe to 24/7 Sports YouTube channel as well. But Drew, as we cap off this show here over the next 10 minutes, a couple names that we wanted to watch in the top 247, whether they're newcomers, whether they're names that we continue to expect to move up in the rankings process. We're going to go to Florida and a guy that I really like, and I'm glad that you chose him, but that is LaWayne McCoy.
Yeah, I talked a lot about Miami Central on the front end of the show with Auburn. LaWayne McCoy is a guy that's also been on the Plains with that whole group. I think he's going to be the best big name to come out of Miami-Dade County. And this is a kid that I first met at FIU satellite camp back in June. He was my alpha dog for the event, worked at wide receiver, dominated one-on-ones. Ole Miss had their staff on hand. FSU had their staff on hand. Michigan was also there. He then went out to Las Vegas at OT7 and put on another excellent performance. And, here in 2022 on the field for Miami Central, he has kind of been the go-to receiver for Keon Lights Out Jenkins. He also had a pick 6 in Miami Central's upset of IMG Academy. So a lot to know about, or a lot to like, about LaWayne McCoy. This is the guy, your typical skill player from the 305, and he's someone I think we're going to be talking about more and more about, Cooper, as we turn that page, like I keep saying, to 2024.
Smooth mover, 3-phase athlete, excellent ball skills. You look at him, he's got really good length, currently ranked number 207 in the top 247. Expect him to continue to move up our board. Drew, I'm going to go with a guy, Jordan Ross, and sometimes we got so much going on that guys like you got to nudge me and say, hey, man, have you seen this dude? We got to get this guy into the top 247. Jordan Ross has exploded onto the scene in Vestavia Hills in Birmingham, Alabama. Another long and explosive pass rusher out of the Southeast. Really like this guy a lot. His ability to close space is really rare. So I think as he continues to develop into his frame, I think Jordan Ross is a guy that I wouldn't be shocked at the end of the day if he's well into that top 50 conversation, because I like him a lot. He can do some things that are really, really hard to find. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Yanze Pierre, the Alabama commit out of the 2023 cycle. Another really good player that has kind of risen lately in the process for us in the top 247. But Drew, the last name for you, Jeremiah Beasley, linebacker from Belleville, a newcomer into the top 247, number 158, the number 13 linebacker in the country. And I know our friend Chris Singletary would be happy that you got him on the list.
Yeah, I talked about offensive production for an off-ball linebacker when we were mentioning Sammy Brown and highlighting him. Jeremiah Beasley, this is a kid that just had 10 carries for 167 yards and 4 touchdowns as Bellevue took down CJ Carr's team 2 weeks ago. And that's what really brought me back to Jeremiah Beasley, is when Singletary was putting all that in our text messages. I mean, Jeremiah was a guy that made my dream team from the OT7, that big tournament back in June out in Las Vegas. We were looking hard for linebackers. I mean, it's hard in that type of setting for them to make plays, but Jeremiah Beasley had multiple interceptions over the course of that multi-day tournament, and he looked excellent in space. So we always talk about the trends of football, what's going on right now. Everyone is airing it out. You need linebackers that can cover tight ends and slot receivers. Jeremiah Beasley looks like someone that can do just that.
All right, Drew, I'm going to take a page out of your book, a little geography bias here. I'm going to stay in Alabama and go to Hoover High School, home of two-a-days and John Parker Wilson. How about my boy Bradley Shaw, linebacker, and a guy that has ballooned in the rankings in the top 247, the number 69 player in the country, number 7 linebacker. Instinctive backer, 6'1", 215 pounds, can play sideline to sideline, multi-dimensional guy. As I always say, you're looking for linebackers that kind of fit the mold of the Sunday profile of what you're looking for at that position. But this guy plays fast. He covers ground quickly, and he plays with little wasted motion. He plays with bad intentions. I love this dude. Another nudge here, Drew, that I'll have to give you credit for. But those are 4 names right now. You, the casual fan at home, if you love recruiting, on those guys, as they will be soon to continue to make their way up the top 247. But Drew, as we finish out here with our 2-minute drill, Charlotte made a pretty surprising hire. I think I called it fascinating as hell yesterday on Twitter, but they hired associate head coach Biff Poggi, and a guy that has a lot of ties to St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, Maryland. But this one kind of came out of the blue. Drew, I know me and you were kind of advocating for Florida State offensive line coach Alex Atkins. And before you know it, this is kind of one of the first vacancies that is filled. Our friend Bruce Feldman at The Athletic came out with a long profile on Biff Poggi and in his value added to the Michigan program in Jim Harbaugh. Your thoughts on this one in the hire for the 49ers?
I don't like it. I mean, I'm just going to be honest here. I know you have some takes on Biff. I covered some St. Francis games when he was still patrolling the sidelines in his cutoff shirt. But the guys at Football Scoop, they reported that a Big Ten offensive play caller, an SEC defensive coordinator, and Skip Holtz, the former journeyman, were all also finalists for this job. And to me, I feel like those guys probably would have been better than Biff. And maybe I'm wrong, but Biff, I mean, you can't even find him on the Michigan Athletic website. I mean, he's kind of this special advisor to Jim Harbaugh. He doesn't have any experience leading a FCS program, let alone an FBS program that's making a transition to the American Athletic Conference. So I'm in wait and see mode. This does not get the initial nod of approval for me. And I'm a guy that watches a lot of Group of 5 football. Charlotte 49ers are looking to expand their stadium. There's a ton of talent in that area. We've seen a big boom here as of late. And this is a guy that really hasn't won a ton of recruiting battles. Sure, he's been linked to some of these high profile prospects that have made their way up to Ann Arbor, but he hasn't had to go out and sit in a living room or deal with some of this new NIL stuff. So I would not be surprised if Charlotte was back on the coaching market in a few years, because this one just feels weird. I don't know. I thought they needed to go with a guy that had ran a program before and had some wins on that Wikipedia page. When I Googled the name, Bill does not. So not a fan of this one.
Wait and see mode. That's a polite way to put it. I'm with you. A little bit of a head scratcher. Obviously, Biff Poggi has a reputation. If anybody has ever been around the Michigan program, obviously I was there in 2017, but this is a guy that Jim Harbaugh relies on a lot, has relied on for quite some time. And with the profile that Bruce Feldman did at The Athletic, if you haven't read that, it's a really good piece. You can kind of see where Biff Poggi kind of asserted himself into the operation, kind of being one of the only people in that building in Ann Arbor that can give Jim Harbaugh a little bit of piece of his mind. So we'll see. This is a fascinating hire. Drew, I'm with you right now. I'm very cautious to see how this one plays out for Charlotte. I guess we'll come back in a year from now and kind of see how it's going. But Drew, for me, with the 2024 update today, I think there's a lot of conversation about quarterbacks. And our job is to project these players out to Sunday. We got to do a better job kind of reinforcing that because that is our job. It's a very difficult thing to do, to project a 15, 16, 17-year-old as a NFL Sunday player. It's not an exact science. It's more of an art form. But a lot of the times we have to rely on historical and statistical data. And for us, there's been a lot of questions about what about quarterbacks under 6 foot. We'll look no further than the last 7 NFL drafts when there's only been one quarterback under 6 feet that has been drafted. That was Kyler Murray, a Heisman Trophy winner, a 2-sport athlete that got drafted in the top 10 of not only the NFL, but the MLB. Also on the other side of that, when you're evaluating left-handed quarterbacks, only one guy that's been drafted in the last 7 years in the NFL, and that is Tua Tagovailoa. So in terms of the data points there, when you're weighting these guys, when you're projecting them to the next level, we're really not debating your feelings. We're just relying on objective facts in terms of projecting quarterbacks to the next level. So that's my little soapbox for today. And I know we're going to get a lot of questions on that in our process, but that's kind of what we always go back to, and that's our baseline. But Drew, I got a Pelicans game to go to at 7 o'clock. A little tailgate. Pels are trying to win their 3rd straight. What you got going tonight?
I do not have a Pelicans. I'm at the Florida Panthers game tomorrow night, so we're just trading nights. I got nothing like that. Maybe a late night running a 10K on Sunday here. So I got to.
God, that sounds awful, man. You're always exercising. I hate that. All right, buddy. Well, we'll see you next week on Monday, 5 o'clock Eastern. And for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. Shout out to our boy Grish producing, filling in today. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.